Good. Does she still go over or give it a review with the reading?
She hasn't been going to school.
I'm going to introduce her real quick, Ed.
No, not yet. There you are.
There I am. Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Ro. I am a bookseller here at Left Bank, and we and all of our team would like to welcome you to Left Bank Books. Please help me in welcoming back our award-winning author, Ed Wheatley, to discuss his newest book celebrating St. Louis baseball history, From St. Louis to Cooperstown, Legends Born and Made in a Gateway City. Thank you for being with us, Ed.
Good to be back.
And some notes before we begin. Tonight's event is made possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, your money goes directly into the local economy, funding your streets, parks, and more. It also helps writers get the support they deserve and allows us to produce events like this. So thank you for shopping local, and thank you for being here tonight. If you enjoyed tonight, please know that we have more events planned all year long for readers of all ages. Tomorrow we have Rob Franklin is going to discuss his new novel, Great Black Hope, which is about a broken justice system and a society that erects barriers to Black achievement. That's going to be at the St. Louis County Library. And in store, we're going to have Robert Baird, and he's going to discuss his new novel, Nimbus, which is a tragic comedy about marriage, religion, and parenthood. So if either of those sound compelling, you can come back here or check out the event at the library. But now for tonight's event, our guest is Ed Wheatley. Ed is an award-winning and best-selling author and film producer, deeply involved in St. Louis sports. He serves on multiple Sports Hall of Fame boards of directors across the St. Louis region, and his many published books have received national recognition, including the Sport Digest selection as the best book published on baseball. His multiple films shown on the PBS network have all received Mid-America Regional Emmy nominations, including one win. His films have appeared in the acclaimed National Baseball Hall of Fame's annual film festival that have provided him multiple opportunities to speak at baseball's venerable institution in Cooperstown. And his book tonight, From St. Louis to Cooperstown, Legends Born and Made in the Gateway City. Baseball fans know the heroes of St. Louis baseball legends such as Hornsby, Dean, Gibson, Brock, or at least they know their names because their images are painted on Busch Stadium's left field wall, honoring the retired uniformed numbers and their inductions into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, in New York. But there are only 13 murals, but there are 55 players who have actually been inducted into the Hall of Fame. So Ed is going to tell us more about who those players are, what are their stories, and including there were 9 men from the American League's St. Louis Browns who have plaques that also named Cooperstown. But why do we not see them? So Ed's going to tell us give us some answers to those questions. And thank you for listening to me talk for so long. Without further ado, Ed Wheatley, thank you so much.
We're doing a little different here tonight. They had a little problem with the ceiling, so we can't use the projection of that we had planned. So what we'll do is just talk through it and hold up a picture or two or whatever, and talk about the history of baseball's greats from St. Louis. And as she finally talked about, this is the men who played for St. Louis's teams, the Cardinals, the Browns, and the Negro League Giants and Stars. It's also the men who grew up in St. Louis and made it into the Hall of Fame. They necessarily played for a St. Louis team. So what really created this book was Busch Stadium. You look at Busch Stadium, left field wall, the pictures of the players that are on that wall. And I had done a book that's a huge bestseller, very good. We do about 10,000 kids every year teaching them how to write well using this book. And it's called Incredible Cardinals. And it really is the story of the men on the left field wall. It's an outstanding book, all very colored, targeted for young kids. And it's about the men on the left field wall. And it tells the story of these players at wall. There's only 13 people on that wall. When you start doing the math, there's 55 members of the St. Louis Cardinals franchise that are in Cooperstown. So who are the other 40-something that you don't see on the left field wall? And if we are really, truly, as it says there in Busch Stadium, the best baseball town in America and the best baseball fans, we need to be an intelligent set of baseball fans and understand all that we have here, because what we have in the book, as you see it here, all these players, this isn't the full boat of all these men, but we have in there for each and every one of them great photos, and we broke it into 3 sections of like their bios, some unique pieces of their history, like where they were born, where they're buried, and what awards they won. And then we have all their stats included. So it's turned out to be a very good read, a very fun thing that you can pick it up, watching TV, and during the commercials, you read this, read a few pages about a player, or it's something you can always come back to. But the key is, who are these men that made St. Louis great? How special are these players here in baseball history, and how little do we know? I mean, there's so much and so interesting that you're going to walk away with this book. As I wrote it, I come up with these things. They're called Harry Carey moments. You remember Harry Carey used to go, "Holy cow," Well, when you start doing this research, it did become holy cow. So many things, and I'll go through some of these in a minute. But the key thing is, when you really look at St. Louis, it is a great baseball town. Next to the Yankees, who have won the most World Series, the Cardinals are second. So when you have good teams, you win World Series, you got good players. So who are the players? Now, in the Hall of Fame, there's 346 inductees in the Hall of Fame. There's 245 players, 28 Negro League players. The 245 were Major League players, 23 managers, 10 umpires, and 40 what we call pioneers. They were executives, owners, or organizers. So 346. And they first got, actually, 89 years ago today, 1936 was the first, they created the opening of the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. And it just so happens it was there today. And the first class, since that first class, there have been 81 induction classes. There have been years where, as it goes from 89 to 81, what happened those other 8 years? Nobody got voted into the Hall of Fame. And it happens. It happened just a few years ago. There was no one inducted because no one got enough votes. And 54% of those classes, 54% of those 81 classes had someone with a St. Louis tie. That's a heck of a lot. And what that means is there were 55 inductees from the Cardinals, like I mentioned. There's 15 Browns also inducted in the Hall of Fame. 6 of those guys played with the Cardinals as well. Their better time was under the Cardinals. So that's how we got to, when in her introduction, she said there were 9 Browns. There's 15 men who had ties. 6 of them also had ties to the Cardinals. They're included in the 55. And then there's 5 men from the Giants and Stars. And there's St. Louis's own three players who were born here. They grew up playing baseball here. They just played on other teams. Think Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra grew up on the Hill. His whole learning of the game, his amateur years were here, all in St. Louis, but he played all those years for the Yankees. So, when you take those numbers and you lay it out, that's 21% of all those inductees have St. Louis roots. 21%. That's more than 1 out of every 5 men and 1 woman. There's 1 woman in the Baseball Hall of Fame, Effa Manley, who owned the Newark Eagles of the Negro Leagues. She is the only woman. She's one of those owners that I mentioned a moment ago in the Hall of Fame. So, but it's 1 out of every 5 people in the Hall of Fame has St. Louis ties. And you think about all the cities that have baseball history and the length of time, and it all comes back how great St. Louis is. And it's through this marvel of all these people that we put this book together to tell their stories. Because again, if you go to Busch Stadium, you only see 13 guys on the wall, and there's all these other people. And the other thing we added to the book, because it's in the Hall of Fame, they're not inductees in the Hall of Fame. They have a wing for the Ford Frick Award winners, which is for the best broadcasters in baseball over all these years. And we have 5 members in them, and we'll talk about them. And it's just the Baseball Writers of America Association has the wing for the best sports writers, newspaper writers, and things that. And St. Louis has had 4. They're the men in the Post and Globe all these years that have been there telling us and teaching us the nuances of the game. So when we put these together, like I said, we've got, it's like a 2-page spread with their biography, their stats as an individual, and their stats as a baseball player to learn about it. And you can see this guy right here, Cy Young, and you go, Cy Young, St. Louis. Yeah, Cy Young actually spent 2 years here in St. Louis. He pitched, and he got here in a kind of a crazy way. In a little bit of baseball history, the Cardinals first came into the National League in 1892. St. Louis had 2 other previous major league teams. They had the St. Louis Brown Stockings in the first class of the National League in 1876. That's when Major League Baseball was formed, 1876, the National League. The American League will come in 1901. But we had the Brown Stockings. So the Brown Stockings from 1882, up to 1891 are a part of the American Association, kind of a rival league to the major leagues. But the team was so good that the National League invited them to come into the National League, and they came. So they merged into the National League in 1892, as I said. And the Cardinals were not the Cardinals in 1892. They were the Browns. They called themselves the Browns. And they called themselves the Browns all the way up until 1898. And they changed their name to a team you may recall if you studied Cardinal history, the Perfectos. New owners had bought the team, and they wanted to change the image because in those early years, the team that was the Browns in the National League, they were terrible. Usually bottom feeders, always low in the standings. So wanted a new image. They called their team the Perfectos, and then the next year in 1900, they started changing their uniform color to the lovely shade of cardinal red that you guys out there in the audience are all wearing. And that's how they got pinned the name Cardinals, and it's stuck ever since. But those 2 other brothers, the Robeson brothers, you may have heard of Robesons, they bought the team, changed the name to Perfectos, changed it then to the Cardinals. They also owned the Cleveland Spiders in the National League. And in 1898, they decided they're going to take the best players off the Spiders and put them in St. Louis, put the worst players in Cleveland. And that's why the Cleveland Spiders own the record that today's Colorado Rockies are hoping they don't break, because the Spiders only won 20 games. They were 20 and 134. They lost 134 games, 120. Because they took the ropes and stuff, they could get a pennant winner with moving the best players to St. Louis. The move of the best players to St. Louis, that's how Cy Young got to St. Louis. He was moved here. And he won 46 of his 511 games, the most in baseball history here in St. Louis. So that's kind of, all those are the little backstories that you read about in these biographies and all these stats and things. So all these players that I spoke of, these numbers of players that played, the 55, the 9, the 6, and such, they played here, whether they played 25 years here or they only played 2 innings. Yeah, there is a major leaguer who is inducted into the Cooperstown Hall of Fame that only played 2 innings. And he played those 2 innings on the St. Louis Cardinals. And in those 2 innings, the first innings in the game, he came in as a sub. The first inning he came in, ground ball was hit to him. He got an error. The next inning, he came up to bat, and he struck out on 3 pitches. So you think, why is he in the Hall of Fame with it? That was his only at bat, his only time in the field. He later became a manager for the Los Angeles Dodgers, actually the Brooklyn Dodgers, and then Los Angeles Dodgers because they moved in 1958. Walter Alston, a name you may resonate with. He had his cup of coffee, 2 innings in playing in the major leagues, but then he had 30 years managing, and the Dodgers are one of the better teams, and he had all that history. And so it's everybody. We got to include them, whether it's 2 innings. They're good players, bad players. Obviously, he wasn't the best player if he can only last 2 innings. We got a Dizzy, a Dazzy, a Rabbit, and the Lip. One of the neat things in there that I like doing is what was their nicknames? Dizzy Dean, of course, you all know. Dazzy Vance. We had a guy named Rabbit Moranville, was a good shortstop. He played on a world championship team. And then when I said the Lip, that's Leo the Lip DeRocher. You may remember him back from the 60s with the Dodgers, and then he managed the Cubs as well. Very, very outspoken, and he earned the name the Lip through all his arguing with everybody and the umpires and everything. But we had 2 of the greatest players from the Negro Leagues play here in St. Louis, and they are in the book. There was one forgotten small step for man and one large step for mankind here in St. Louis baseball. Sounds like Neil Armstrong and Apollo, right? But in that one large step for mankind, Hank Thompson and Willard Brown of the 2 is in the Hall of Fame, but the St. Louis Browns were the first team to have 2 African-American players. Nobody else did. They were the 3rd and 4th men to cross the white line after Jackie Robinson on April 15, 1947. First total major league player. Then Larry Doby on July 5th, 1947, became the first American League African-American to play with the Cleveland Indians, signed by Bill Beck, who is in the Hall of Fame as owner of the St. Louis Browns and the Cleveland Indians. But Willard Brown would go on to have a great career in the Negro Leagues, in the Caribbean Leagues. He is in the Hall of Fame. And the reason I tied it to, the Apollo missions and the landing, we all know who the first and second men were to land on the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, right? But who were the 3rd and 4th men to cross the white line of a Major League Baseball game was Hank Thompson and Willard Brown that I spoke of. Nobody can tell me who the 3rd and 4th man was that walked on the moon. And likewise, Hank Thompson and Willard Brown are forgotten people. To me, St. Louis, we need a statue of those 2 to be the first. And how big that was. 3 years later, there's still only 9 African Americans playing in the baseball in 1949. And St. Louis had 2. They were the first to have 2, and we really should be highlighting that and the heroics of that. That is something that was very special. So, again, they are in the book, his story. It's those little kind of moments that people are going, Willard Brown, who? Willard Brown, as I said, should be a statue out in front of Busch Stadium. There's things like one of these players, he had the highest career on-base percentage, only trailing Ted Williams and Babe Ruth. Someone from St. Louis? Yeah. He became a manager. We think of John McGraw as a great manager, but he played almost 2 decades as a player, and he had his years in St. Louis, and only Ted Williams and Babe Ruth had higher on-base percentages. That's recognized. And when you speak of Babe Ruth, in 1974, April 74, we all remember Hank Aaron chasing to break Babe Ruth's all-time 714 home run career record. And most people our ages remember watching that. It was in the news every day. Is Hank going to break it today? When's he going to break it? And he eventually broke it there on that night in April 1974, hit number 715. So you think, well, Ruth retired in 1935. So 1935 to 1974, he was the all-time career champion, untouched. But You know, there was a man who played here in St. Louis who for 25 years before Babe Ruth broke his record, he was the all-time career home run champion. And all the hoopla and all the news that was out there for Mark McGwire when he did his big numbers here back in 1998, never even heard this brought up. But there was this man, Roger Connor, was the all-time career home run champion, and he spent time in St. Louis. I mean, and there's other little nuances. You know, we had a player, and he actually was a very famous player. He became one of the most critical touch points in Cardinal history. He actually helped deliver the 1927 World Series. 1927, Cardinals get to their first World Series. They're playing the Yankees. They're tied up 2 games apiece going into game. 3 games apiece going into Game 7. And this man has won 2 of the games pitched earlier, and he actually pitched the day before the Game 7. So he's sitting down in the bullpen. They said maybe he had a party the night before. He was known to imbibe a little. He's just sleeping it off because he pitched a complete game win the day before. I'm not going to pitch again. Well, this man, who I'm going to mention, and if you don't know him now, he was named after a sitting president of the United States. That's how he got his name. And then later on, they made a Hollywood biopic starring Doris Day as this guy's wife. And his role is played by a future president of the United States. And it's not Donald Trump. Donald's not been in any movie. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan played Grover Cleveland Alexander, named after the president when he was born. And then they played this movie, The Winning Team, of Grover Cleveland Alexander, played by Ronald Reagan, and Doris Day played his wife. So it's just these like little quirky things, of all time that go in there. But anyway, back to the ball game. The Cardinals are hanging on by a slim lead, a 1-run lead, and the Yankees load the bases in the bottom of the 8th. And Grover Cleveland is, come on, get up, you got to come in. Tony Lazzeri, one of the really great hitters on the Yankees, is coming to bat. Well, he's a dangerous hitter. Grover Cleveland, he comes in, and what's he do? He sets him up, as he says. Gets a called strike, throws one real inside. Lazzeri hits it deep into left field. But because he threw it so much inside, it's a foul ball. As Alexander says later, I set him up. Next pitch, strike 3. Cardinals go on to win their first and ever World Series. And Grover Cleveland Alexander, before he came to the Cardinals, was one of the best pitchers in the National League, pitching for the Philadelphia team. So it's just, these are the kind of stories you find in here that aren't just statistics. These are really human stories, and what makes this really good. There's a story of the guy, we talked about Cy Young a minute ago. He's got 511 wins. Meant he won 300 at one time, but here from St. Louis, there was a guy who won 300 games long before Cy Young, and he actually grew up in St. Louis, was born in the Irish Patch section, not too far from where we are speaking here today. And he had a strange name, Pud Galvin. And he got the name Pud because it said, there's 2 different parts of the story. One, his belly looked like it was shaking like pudding, or he made the batters look like pudding from his fastball. But Pud Galvin won over 300 games in the major leagues. In the Hall of Fame, pitched here in St. Louis, was born here in St. Louis, raised here in St. Louis, and he did it before Cy Young. I mean, then, 100 years later, there's a player who still holds the record of 55 inside the park home runs back in the days when home runs are big. He's in there. So these are all the kind of little stories that we've got in here telling through this. You know, we got the catcher, the first to wear shin guards and a padded face mask. He played for the Cardinals. And then we have, when the Negro Leagues and the Major Leagues were merged together several years ago, we have a player who holds the third highest career batting average. He was from the St. Louis Giants. The Giants were the predecessors from the Stars. The Giants went into the Negro Leagues, which were formed in 1920. 1921, they get new ownership, and they changed their name for a new image. Oscar Charleston is the man you hear about, and he is the third highest batting average after Josh Gibson and Ty Cobb, and he played here in St. Louis. So that is kind of a quick overview, because if I tell you everything in the book, you don't want to buy the book, and that's what this is all about. So, I mean, if somebody has some questions or some questions from the online side, we can take them and see what you got. So,
Should either of you have a question? I don't see any yet.
all right, and then we'll get these. We'll sign some books and get everybody out of here early.
All right, wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ed, and thank you all for coming. Thank you for those of us who are online. I don't know if you can see me or not. But yeah, thank you so much. All righty, y'all. We have a little table back
Go
there,
and
and yeah, appreciate you.
silver pins.
Yes.
So where do we buy the books?
Oh, we have all of Ed's books right on the front desk out there. So
Okay.
the kids' ones, the new one. Yeah.
I think he wanted them all to sign the others.
Sure.